Hey, how are you? Welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. We're going to be talking about a blue-white control deck that I've been having a lot of fun with in Standard right now. It's actually one of the only decks that I've been enjoying in Standard at the moment because not a lot of decks really, follow my fancy. I don't enjoy playing the Shieldred game plan, even though I know it's very powerful. I've been toying with Esper Legends, but I don't have a lot of the cards I need for that quite yet. But I did have all the cards I needed for this, and this deck has been quite a bit of fun. So let's look through it and let's look at the creatures first, because I feel like the creatures are a very important part. Number one being Ledger Shredder. In a meta where people are trying to do a lot of spells consistently and will potentially play a lot of counter spells too, Ledger Shredder can be really, really good, especially if you're in a matchup where you're just like counterspelling the counterspell. You can just make Ledger Shredder become larger and larger and larger and become a flying threat that your opponent has to deal with at some point. And one connive trigger going correctly on it actually gets it out of cut down range. So if you can connive once and get that +1/+1 counter, he can no longer be cut down. Very nice. And not legendary, so you can play like 4 of them and connive constantly. You can put your opponent on a really fast clock. Speaking of things that can put your opponent on a fast clock, Haughty Djinn as my number 2 creature in the deck. I actually value Ledger Shredder above Haughty Djinn in this deck, because Haughty Djinn has some non-bows with some of the cards in the deck, but he's still an incredibly powerful card. People get very scared when he hits the board. People really like to deal with him. And if they're busy dealing with your Haughty Djinn, they might leave your Ledger Shredders alone. Your Ledger Shredders might continue to grow through connive triggers. Or they could be dealing with your heckin' bird boy, whose name I just forgot, Ledger Shredder, and ignore your Haughty Djinn. And all of that attention means by the time Sanctuary Warden becomes playable, this thing is nigh unstoppable. I might recommend 1 or 2 copies max of her, because this is a very fast meta, and you might not be able to get her down on curve. But Sanctuary Warden is incredibly powerful right now. Highly recommend including it in a blue-white control deck, because you're trying to get to the late game, and in the late game, a 5/5 flyer who makes 1/1 chump blockers, especially in a post-Meat Hook Massacre era, where that shield counter goes a lot further. It's very powerful. 2 copies of Farewell. Sometimes you just need to hit a hard reset button, and Farewell is amazing at that. If you're running blue-white control, I don't know why you wouldn't run Farewell. Wandering Emperor, 4 copies. She's omnipresent in control decks, because she's just that good. Flash into exile attacking creature. Amazing. Gaining life, awesome. Make a board presence that can be slowly grown with +1/+1 counters and first strikes counters when you attack. Amazing. Teferi, another really good planeswalker, but he's only a one-off because he is very... You don't want to draw him as often as you draw Wandering Emperor. He will give you great mana advantage, giving you an extra mana per turn minimum, or give you great card advantage, being able to find answers like, say, your Farewells. He's very good in that regard. And if you can ultimate him, you will just overrun your opponent with card advantage. Speaking of card advantage, let's look at our card advantage spells. Memory Deluge and Silver Scrutiny. Run these any way you like. Memory Deluge has a non-bow with Haughty Djinn in that if you play it for its flashback cost, it will exile itself, losing a power on Haughty Djinn. Kinda rough. Silver Scrutiny does have a combo with Haughty Djinn, though, in that you can play it for X=1 and only have to play 2 blue for it. Well, you can play for X=3 and only have to play 2 blue and then 2 other mana for it. Because his make spells cost 1 normal colorless mana less to cast does apply to X cost spells, meaning that you can play Silver Scrutiny for X=1 for the cost of 2 blue, which can be very, very useful for triggering Ledger Shredder procs or just continuing to draw for your answers. Speaking of your answers, Destroy Evil. Shieldred exists. You need an answer. If she lands on the battlefield and you need something that'll destroy her, Destroy Evil is in fact that. Make Disappear, amazing counterspell, really good on curve. Negate, really good for countering some more threatening stuff. Syncopate, really powerful, but falls off really hard late game. That's why I only have 2 copies of it and only 2 copies of Negate. They both do similar stuff. Syncopate is really good early, because you can, especially if you're hitting land drops, you can make your opponent either pay a certain amount to tap out for turn, or you can just make it so that the thing gets exiled, which is really good for playing with, say, Tenacious Underdog on the other side. Can you tell this? I've played a lot of black on the opposing side of the board from me. But solid counterspells, toy with them as you wish. We'll go over the sideboard and alternate cards in a minute here, don't you worry. Reckoner Bankbuster is It's great. I might just cut the card entirely, depending on the matchup. If you're playing best of threes especially, it might just be too slow. But if you're playing against another controlling deck and they're playing board wipes and stuff, Reckoner Bankbuster can be a sneaky little sits on the board and gets ignored type thing until all of a sudden there's a 4/4 flying at your opponent every turn. Wedding Announcement is just great. Board presence, pumps the party. Really, really good card. Might want to run 4 copies of it because it's never really bad to draw into. Consider. Amazing cantrip. Allows you to surveil. As you don't know, that means you look at the top card and you can throw it in your graveyard if you want. Really great for comboing off with Haughty Djinn and Haughty Shredder, making them grow constantly. Fading Hope, here for some safety and here to bounce tokens mostly. You don't really care about bouncing something like a Shieldred, but it can be useful for keeping her off the board for another turn. Say they want to play her on turn 4 and you're like, oh, well, I don't have a Destroy Evil or a Farewell or a Wandering Emperor yet. You can just bounce it with Fading Hope to give yourself another turn. It's pretty okay. You could consider cutting it. Speaking of stuff you could consider cutting, the mana base. This is what I found the most success with. 4 Tranquil Coves does sound very slow, but it is land that gives you life early. It is both colors, and since we only have Consider and Fading Hope as 1-drops, you can kind of play around that idea by still using Tranquil Cove. We're mostly caring about our 2 and 3 drops in this deck, our Ledger Shredders, our Djinns, our Wedding Announcements, or 4 drops in the form of Wandering Emperor, so it's not that slow. Definitely run 4 Deserted Beaches, probably run 4 Adarkar Wastes. The Painland aspect is really tough right now in a control deck though, because you will often get overrun early, and just have to play Hold On Till Farewell, so you might only want to run 1 or 2. Otawara and Iganjo are optional, but I still really love them because channel effects go past counterspells because you are not casting a spell, you are channeling something, which is really nice. You don't get to get the -1 effect because we don't run any legendaries in the deck, but still pretty useful. Iganjo is very nice for dealing with something that's low toughness early. Otawara is great for bouncing stuff that's just annoying late. Sideboard, these are just options that I find to be very powerful, but I don't like including them in the main board except in certain matchups. I typically only play best of 1, but they're still good cards. Wash Away. You'd be astounded at how useful this can be into, say, oh, I don't know, a card that's cast from the graveyard constantly. Did someone say Tenacious Underdog? Can you tell we play against a lot of black in Standard? Yeah, no, Wash Away is great. If they're trying to play stuff out of the graveyard or flash it back, Wash Away is a 1-cost counterspell. Otherwise, it is a 3-cost counterspell still, which is fine. It's not quite as good as Negate, but it is still very, very useful. Fateful Absence, great for destroying creatures or planeswalkers. Does give out a clue token, though, so, you know, make of that what you will. I personally still rather prefer Destroy Evil in most matchups, but Fateful Absence can be very good if it's a Planeswalker-heavy deck. Say, some form of Esper Super Friends. Geist Wave is kind of Fading Hope with a little bit of an asterisk on it. It's more expensive, but you can draw a card if you're using it for safety, but Fading Hope gives you the Scry and it's cheaper, and yeah. Faithful Mending, I don't personally enjoy it as a card, but Faithful Mending is a solid looting effect because you gain life with it, which can be very useful in certain matchups. Anointed Peacekeeper is a wonderful 3-drop right now in white that will allow you to just control games really heavily. If you really want to play a controlling game into, you know, the Esper Legends decks that are flying around, or the mono black decks with Lilianas and Shieldreds out the ass, Anointed Peacekeeper can land on board and make those things cost 2 more, delaying your opponent's clock by 2 turns. Aether Channeler is a sometimes useful inclusion. I find that the bird tokens can be nice, the bouncing can be nice, and drawing a card is always nice. He is only a 2/1 though, so that makes him a little lower in value compared to some of the other cards here. Like, compare Aether Channeler to your Haughty Djinns. Like, Haughty Djinn's going to be a flyer with massive power. Aether Channeler is going to make me a 1/1 bird. Cool. But he can still be very useful. Depopulate is a very powerful sweeper. You're not typically going to get the value out of if you own a multicolored creature, draw a card, but it's just a good sweeper. Since Doomscar is gone now, Depopulate is your de facto sweeper. It is pretty powerful and pretty useful if you don't want to fare well. Once again, these are all pretty matchup dependent, but I still enjoy them. That's going to be the video. This is very long. Let me know if you want me to start including like gameplay or something in these videos. I'm just currently just showing off the decks because this is what I like doing. Let me know if you want to include gameplay or something. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Thanks for hanging out, and I hope to catch you in the next one.